you to make decisions financially you don't want to make. You might do some things illegal. You might. I think we've all contemplated flipping a brick. We've all contemplated PPP. We've all contemplated saying, you know what, I'ma just go get this loan and do it like this. We all contemplated, hitting a lick. Some of y'all actually did it, but you know, I, but a lot of times when we get up in these kind of back into a wall kind of modes, we don't think long term. And one thing about me is I've always been good at thinking long term. I've been caught up in the moment plenty of times too, but a lot of times I think long term. Now I know what you're thinking. What you guys, what you selling? Now look, I know you all are on social media every day, especially people who trying to sell a business. You trying to promote your stuff. You trying to spread your message. You got the calling. You got the word from the Lord. All that good stuff, right? But you don't feel like it. You don't have the time to promote the social media. You don't have the time to create the content calendars. You don't have the time for none of that, right? So that is where my new package comes in. And this is called the Trust Builder Package. All right. So this is for those of you who want to create great social media content, whether it's on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Facebook, YouTube. All right. And you need somebody to do your captions, descriptions for you that are high SEO, that'll get you pushed out there to the masses and to find your personal development audience, because you are more than likely a personal development influencer. So who does this cater to? Coaches and consultants, faith-based leaders, wellness experts, authors, podcasters, motivational speakers, educators, mental health advocates, you name it. All of you who are trying to see the betterment of your community. All right, this package is for you. All right, hit me up in the DM, email me, reach out on the Nazio platform, and I'll hook you up. What is up, party people? It is PSA. We back again. And I'm not gonna lie, this episode today, you've seen the title, you've seen the promo, you heard the promo, and this episode is a lot to digest, I believe, because we're talking about something that's actually pretty intense. And again, I don't want to be a trigger for anybody or anything, so we're gonna be covering a lot today. I need to get some things out, and then we need to go from there. But let's get into this week's meme first. The meme reads, "Is unaliving yourself selfish?" Now, we know what word, and I will use the word, which is suicide. And honestly, this in honor of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. I have to be consistent with sometimes with months where it's like a big mental health month, and just me again being honest with myself, where I'll see the month it is, and I need every season and every episode needs an episode dedicated to whatever month it is in the mental health space, I believe, and especially one like this that has affected me personally, as far as on both sides, as far as wanting to unalive myself, and also having a close friend who committed suicide in 2021, and which actually inspired that episode, the original episode. This is almost like a kind of like a part two, but then kind of like just where we are in the world today, because it's 4 years later, and just having that conversation yet again. And I wanted to really do something like this, just a little different. So inspirations for this episode. All right. So inspirations come from a few different places. Obviously, the previous episode, season 5. Again, I keep telling you, and I'm saying it again, I don't know what mojo magic I had in season 5, but we bringing that back for season 9. Then it was a quote. Like I said, God knew you before you were born. That tells me life is not random and it's not ours to cancel on a whim. Now that's one of those quotes. I know people will be like, some people, it'll be split people down the middle, but it's one that is very true. and I don't want someone who's had those thoughts and struggles before. I don't want anybody to feel like how they feel don't matter, because that's not what I'm saying. But it's a quote that we're going to digest and unpack as we go along today. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and jump into happy hour. Now, we're going to talk about some stuff that's a little heavy today. But before we get into that, I got to be funny just a little bit, just because this is so intense. One thing that I don't do is I don't answer the phone. And I'm going to be honest, I don't plan to start. I don't feel like it. Like y'all don't be wanting nothing. Like half the things y'all send me, you could text. If you was in dire need, you wouldn't call me. In reality, most, if not all, wouldn't call me no way. So for me, it's kind of like you what you calling me for? Because your other people didn't answer? You bored? You could send me a text. You want to come to you want to come to my house? You could probably come over. Maybe. You want to go eat? We can do that. But I'm not gonna start answering the phone. I just, y'all don't want nothing. And half the time, and then if you and then say it's an event. Say it's an event. And you call me asking 1,000,001 questions. You asking who all gonna be there, like you got some ops. You don't have any ops. Why are you asking who all gonna be there? And I get that this conversation a little bit when it's like trying to see who all gonna be there just to make sure, I guess maybe certain moves and energies you want to deal with. But most times it's like you trying to, I don't know. Just go. The one thing about me that's different than most people, especially that type of conversation, is I tend to know who don't like who's not feeling who, because it always either I can just tell or usually somebody say something. So I'm not going to invite you there if I know this person there or somebody you don't want to be around. I'm pretty good with that. I'm actually great with that. I ain't gonna lie. So I'm kind of like the glue to a lot of these groups. So yeah, I'm gonna make sure you're okay. But I'm not gonna answer the phone. And also with the whole question thing, you asked me 1,000,001 questions. Everybody know I hate 1,000,001 questions. One thing about me is I'm very intense with detail, so that this, that. So that way you can kind of choose to show up if you want to, what time, where, what to bring. That so you ain't got to worry about it. Now sometimes the girls would be like trying to figure out what to wear. Well, should I wear? I don't know. I don't know if you should wear a see-through shirt and some. I don't know. I guess. I don't know. I don't know. But see, this is why I don't answer my phone, because now I don't have to worry about those type of questions. If I just don't answer, I ain't gonna worry about it. I ain't gonna call my one homeboy because he gonna answer. He gonna answer the phone and then be looking crazy. I just won't answer. I just won't answer. And I will die on that hill of not answering the phone because, yeah, I don't feel like it. Is that selfish? Maybe. We say it's unallowing yourself selfish, right? If you recall, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but me not answering the phone, probably. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and jump into the next segment for today, which is the case study. And in this segment, we got some videos we got to unpack. So this week we only have 2, and they're actually short. I didn't want to get too. I'm just gonna let them play. So let's share my screen and let's go to the first video for today, and let's get it cracking.
At 19, those turned into voices in my head.
Yes.
That told me what I had to do to myself. Yes. And I ended up making my way out to the Golden Gate Bridge on a bus, crying my eyes out, hoping, wishing, and praying, Jay, that one person would see my pain and say something kind. Because if someone reached out and said, "Hey, kid, are you okay? Brother, is something wrong? Or pal, can I help you?" I would have told them everything and begged them to save me. But the only person on that bus to say anything to me, when the bus got to the Golden Gate Bridge parking lot and 100 people deboarded, was the driver who stood, turned, and said, "Come on, kid, get off the bus. I got to go." I walked up to that man. I looked him right in the eyes. His waterfalls were flowing from mine, and he just motioned for me to get off the bus. And I walked across the 2-mile stretch of walkway that is the 9th wonder of the world, the Golden Gate Bridge, in all its glorious beauty. And after 40 minutes of pacing back and forth, I found a light rail. On that rail, Jay, someone had carved into the rail, jump.
Wow.
A woman from my left approached me. I prayed she was going to ask me if I was okay. I couldn't say it aloud. I needed someone to reach in. And she said, "Will you take my picture?"
Hmm.
And I had to smile a little bit like, okay, terrible timing. I took her picture. She posed several times and she walked away. At that moment, I told myself the single greatest lie any of us have ever told. Absolutely nobody cares. The furthest thing from the truth. Any member of my family, every one of my friends, Jay, if you had been there that day seeing 19-year-old young me leaning over that rail crying, you would have done something about it. People care. People care. I couldn't see it.
We never can. I couldn't.
At that moment, the voice yelled, and I mean beckoned at decimals you can't express without piercing eardrums. Jump now, and I did. But the moment, the millisecond my hands left the rail, instantaneous regret for my actions.
Okay, that was a lot. Shout out to Jay Barnett at Just Here with Dr. J podcast. You know, I work on as well, but you know, we work smart, not hard. So might as well. He just had the episode with Kevin Hines about Kevin Hines jumping, and thank God still alive after jumping from the Golden Gate Bridge. And I won't reveal too much if you don't know about it. I want y'all to go check that episode out if you haven't. But just from what we just watched, most people are crying for help, and they do it in his and it goes to show you a lot of times when people do those extreme, you know, cries for help, people will be like, you know, I heard people say sometimes we gonna go to the day where somebody might be like, this girl I know I went to high school with, I remember she was saying, talking about, I think when Fantasia tried to unalive herself, and she was like, I hate when people try to do that and then they don't do it. If you're gonna do it, just do it. And when I first heard it, I was just like, well, the girl who said it is kind of like rough anyway, but it's one of those situations where it's like a lot of times people do it for attention, and I'm not all for doing things for attention. Like I want people to look at me, but sometimes people do that with the intent of, I don't know how to verbalize this, so this is the only thing that I can do, because, and that was a woman that did it. This was a grown man, you know, who was like, I don't know how to verbalize it. And he kept saying, I wanted somebody to see me. I wanted somebody to be like, hey, is everything okay? And it just goes to show you, it just takes 2 seconds to, because here's the thing I'm not going to do, and I'm not trying to be funny, but for real, I'm not going to answer the phone, but I will call you, and I expect you to answer. It's terrible, right? But, and people always answer the phone, right? You never know who you will call, and that would be the conversation that just saved their life, because you just had a conversation. Well, I was just checking on you. We talk about voices being heard. That man that said that, Kevin Hines, that was demons speaking to him. They told him jump. That was demonic. But I can't help but to believe God can put the voice in your head to say, hey, call this person right now. You thinking about them. Some say, don't wait. And you've heard people have those stories where they was like, they randomly thought about somebody, and then they said, let me just text them. Let me call them. And then I've done it, and sometimes it wasn't even on no, you know, unalive or suicide type stuff. They was literally just like, I was having a bad day. Thanks for calling. You know, a call goes a long way. And I felt like I'm kind of contradicting myself because I say don't call me, but I don't know. I want y'all to let me know in the comments what y'all think about that. All right, so now we have one more video to watch, then we're gonna move on, and this one is a little shorter, so let's check it out.
So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression. And this is super scary. There's one study I saw recently that suggests that 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. I believe the statistic in my clinical practice because I know what depression looks like. I know what bipolar disorder looks like. And half the men that I've worked with, at least, are not actually mentally ill. See, mental illness means a pathology of the mind, which means that the mind is malfunctioning. Most of the suicidal men that I work with, their mind isn't malfunctioning. They genuinely have a life that is no longer worth living. They're looking at things and objectively realizing that there's no way out of this situation. So they turn to suicide. So I know it's kind of like a very controversial statement, but I think that's what my clinical practice has shown. And there's some research to even back that up. So if we sort of look at what's going on with men, they have nowhere to turn to. And the number one thing that correlates with it is not mental illness, but is a sense of thwarted belongingness. But basically what happens is what causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression. And this is super scary. There's one study I saw.
Okay. So even in that case, similar things. It was kind of like the Kevin Hines thing where this is a licensed professional who basically said, like, men can't find anybody to connect with and they feel rejected. And that spirit of rejection has tore this generation apart. We did an episode talking about the spirit of rejection in the orphan and all that. And that's at the root of it. Of course, we know the root of it is demonic and then it turns psychological. So we're not negating that this is not a psychological issue because it is. But even in his debate, which was a lot of times they don't have mental illness. It's just a lot, and everyone's story is different. But a lot of times there's no sense of belonging. They feel rejected. They feel like this may be the only choice left. I knew some, people unalived themselves, took themselves out because they felt like I have nowhere else to go and everything else leads to this. So it's either this or that. And they like, well, I'm going to just take the way out. And they just crack. A comment that I heard to somebody I know, and they were telling me how they told their mom that, I think I should, or they thought about committing suicide. And I'm all for tough love, and this conversation we know is a slippery slope, but I remember he told me his mom was like, well, basically that's a coward's way out because I had this go on for me and this go on for me and I didn't do it, and I didn't take myself out and I had these kids and this, and two things can be true at the same time. She might not be wrong. I don't believe she's wrong. But if you've never, and a lot of people can't relate to this, and a lot of people, I don't want you to relate to it. I can relate to it because I've been there. Not there, haven't been there in a very long time, and I'm not going back. But if you feel as though this is the only way out of a situation, nothing else is working, or I don't feel like I belong here. Like I everywhere I go, I'm the problem. I messed up. I can't get this right. This everything fails and falls through. It's like the signs may be, the one may assume, well, maybe I should just go because this is just a lot for everybody. Maybe I'm too much for people. Maybe I'm too much for myself. This is just too much. That's the only way out. Let's do it. But that's a lie. And as we see people who've overcome suicide, like Kevin Hines, he believed, the biggest lie there is nobody that cares about me and nothing like that. And that's not the case. That's not the case. And a lot of times we care about people who don't care about us, but then there are people who care about us we overlook. So then indirectly what you're doing, has done to you is what you're doing to others. Think about it. Think about it. All right, y'all, let's move to my favorite segment, which is QT&A. And this is questions that need addressing. All right. So in these questions that need addressing, let's ask. The first question asks, do you believe suicides are selfish, or do you think people in their lives because nobody saw their struggle? So no, in the first episode of this, which is suicide selfish from 2021, we addressed that. And by definition, it's technically not selfish because there's no selfish gain from committing suicide. A lot of times they felt like a burden. They felt like in some cases they were helping people. And I guess you could contest the people who felt like, I'm not loved, but that isn't selfish because it's like you don't gain anything for that. And in a lot of cases, you feel like you're helping situations, or this is the only solution. And people say, well, what about your family? What about your friends? And that is true. And I do think, it is a slippery slope, but it's at the same time, if all these things keep happening, you keep feeling like a lot of times you feel like you don't belong or they're you the problem. You feel like you helping in a weird way. We know it's demonic, but And I said, do you think people in their lives because nobody saw their struggles? A lot of times that's the case. Have you ever dismissed some signs that someone was hurting because admitting it would make you feel weak? I'm sure I have. I can't think of a time in particular where I just dismissed signs that someone was hurting. Well, it wasn't suicidal, but I have been dismissive of people and that they was hurting, because a lot of times when people say, for instance, and this one is hard too, because how do you address if someone is upset by something you did, but they're being disrespectful? How do you address that? How do you address that calmly? You're going to be dismissive and kind of like, I'm not listening to this, because you have the right to, that's your reality, that you were hurt by what I did. But in the same breath, you're being disrespectful. So it's like, I don't know how to navigate that. If you do, let me know. If someone loves you, ask for help, but ignore it. But if you love someone if someone you love asks for help, but you ignore them, was that selfish or a failure paying attention? I think it could be both. Because usually somebody cries out. People say we catch it, but sometimes people cry out in subtle ways. And we have to pay attention to the differences. When my friend in 2021 committed suicide, looking back, it was little stuff he did that kind of alerted me to know that, not that it was coming, but just how his views on life. I remember he made a statement one time saying like he didn't want to be no 80-year-old man. He was like, I'm gonna just ask God, just take me. I don't want to be that old. And see me, I have a different perspective because I'm gonna live to 102. And so I'm gonna be a healthy old man. I had a family friend, he lived to like 101 or 2 or something. He used to cut his own grass and do all types of stuff. My grandma just turned 90. Y'all seen the vlog, you seen the TikTok. So I look at it a little differently, but everybody's not the same. I've heard somebody say they want to die at 60. I'm like, that's literally around the corner. That did not me. I won't. This is a good one. What is your take on the suicide pods? I think they're an abomination. There's nothing you can say to justify a suicide pod, because for you to prescribe someone and tell them that, I've heard it was on Twitter, I think, and somebody had said that a therapist told me one time that some people aren't for the world. That is ridiculous. We've actually unpacked that with the licensed professional on this podcast. For that's ridiculous. For a licensed professional say some people just aren't meant for the world. What? I mean, I get everybody's not believing, that's perfectly fine. But to tell somebody they're here, I don't know. I'm just weird about coincidences and things. And I don't believe nothing is a coincidence. I don't believe anything was an accident. It just happened that way. I don't believe you were born just by accident. So, the world's just too much for people. You should just go ahead and just leave. I just think that is just unhealthy. I think that is, I hate that phrase. We be using it for disgusting. I hate it. I don't like that. I think that that's terrible just to say we can there have been not with the debate with that. Some people say, what if someone is a vegetable? They can't think, they can't speak, and they're just there. Could we just do the suicide pod then? I get everybody's not a believer, but we know this podcast is what it's for. So it is what it is for people who are, not necessarily perfect, but who are striving for that, right? My question to that, which many questions I will have to ask you, and you might not have the answer, and I might not have the perfect answer, but I will really implore you to really ask, what would God say about that? Would God tell you to go get in the suicide pod? Would he tell you to do that? And I'm not trying to say that to be dismissive. I'm saying it really I want you to really see God's face on it and ask him what. Now, again, we get the voices are loud because I've been there. So it's like, I'm not speaking on something I ain't been through. I've been there. I hear the voice. I've heard the voices. I've heard the rejection, and it would just be better if I've heard all that. So I know from experience. But what would, and we're not going to get into the theology of where you're going once you do it. I have my beliefs on that, where you would go if you did it. Some people don't believe in that, whatever. But what would he say to you wanting to get in the suicide pod? What would he say about that? This is for anybody who think they want to start a podcast. So is it you? Do you think you want to start a podcast? Cool. Let's be real. Watch this. So we don't need another podcast that sound like everybody else, right? We got enough of them. We're going to talk about those today. But saying the same stuff with no structure, no message, no plan, that ain't good. Now that's where I come in. Me, right here, Head Honcho. All right. So I have a new podcast package. It's called the Legacy Launchpad. Now, what is this? This is for podcasters who fall in the personal development influencer space. So who is that? That would be obviously personal development. That's pretty broad, but coaches and speakers, Christian-based influencers, faith influencers, maybe a pastor, a church, any type of course creator, education, mental health, wellness, nutritionist, all that good stuff. If you are trying to help the betterment of other people, fitness too, then this is for you. I will help you build your podcast from the ground up. This includes toning up, giving you the message, your niche, your show structure, the episode outlines, the intros, outros, descriptions, all of you. Show up to record and I build your legacy. If you're ready to stop playing, let's get it cracking. What would he say? A lot of people don't know. And a lot of people didn't even try to ask. And I just say, ask and see what you think he would say. Just ask, hey, it might not answer right that second, and he might. That's something you need to do. Let's get into another segment for the day, which is, what does this have to do with mental health? Now, back then, we didn't have all these great segments like we do now. We had a few segments. Actually, I think all of these segments are new from back then because we didn't have all of this, but let's get into the first part. So according to the Prairie Care, the truth about suicide in young men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Since 2010, male suicide rates have increased 30%. Risk factors include untreated mental health issues, social isolation, financial stress, and the pressure to appear strong. Now, the main thing with that one that jumps out to me is the financial stress, because we do live more where it's hard to make money, and we see the 50-50, and the man can't provide for me. And I can't help but to believe, although I know the ultimate scheme of that is to keep people from getting married and keep people separate. But also when I see the financial stress, I think about that as a man, you're supposed to be the provider, right? And if you can't provide, that's going to be another type of stress. Because the one thing, if a woman, you ain't got no money, but if a man ain't got no money, that you don't feel like a man. You don't. And that can add to the financial stress, which could lead to you to contemplate this. It could lead you to make decisions financially you don't want to make. You might do some things illegal. You might. I think we've all contemplated flipping a brick. We've all contemplated PPP. We've all contemplated saying, you know what, I'm going to just go get this loan and do it like this. We all contemplated, hitting a lick. Some of y'all actually did it. But, but a lot of times when we get up in these kind of back into a wall kind of modes, we don't think long term. And one thing about me is I've always been good at thinking long term. I've been caught up in the moment plenty of times too, but a lot of times I think long term. According to Springer, male suicide and barriers to accessing professional support. Many men report shame, fear, and embarrassment about showing vulnerability. A study found that men often avoid therapy because they don't know how to share their struggles or worry they'll be misunderstood. We've had it here discussed here before. I've heard men say, I don't see myself paying for advice. But you're not paying for advice. You're paying on strategies to help you overcome things and to open up and to see things from a different perspective from a person who doesn't know you, because a lot of times your friends are going to be biased. There was a situation happened to me recently where I did ask for honest opinions, but I do feel like a lot of people were somewhat being biased. Not really, but a lot of times. And sometimes you need an outside vessel to explain to you, like, no, that's not right. Maybe this was this, maybe this was that. I'm going to say this. If you are going to chat GPT to discuss and to unpack your feelings, emotions, and have like conversations back and forth with AI about the decision making when it comes to your life, as far as if you choose to want to be here, if you are going to chat GPT like a Ouija board, not Luigi board, but a Ouija board. It look dirty, got gnats flying around. Hold on, y'all. But trying to go to Chat GPT to get them to tell you what you should do next, like SpongeBob, old Magic Conch, what do we do now? If you are doing that, I implore you to stop, because there was a case that just happened where this young boy committed suicide, unalived himself based on what Chat GPT told him how to do. And you do not need to go to an AI to unpack. Now, with that, I do believe it's okay if you're like maybe seeing like something I do, like if you're explaining something that's going on with like a family member, friend, and you can't verbalize what it is, like what is this person doing? Because I can't understand, like they did this, and I can't put a name on it. That's cool. But if you're really going to chat, like, and I've done it before, back. I don't do it now, but if you're doing that regular, like, hey, chat, so this person just did this to me. Why are they doing this? What should I do? How should I respond? Okay, so then now I'm not saying you can't maybe ask for like a response to like an email or maybe but if you're using it to every little scenario in your life to unpack why this person did this, then that, because here's the thing with the chat, they can maybe unpack it a little bit, but you have to understand they don't know the full backstory. And I'm gonna be honest, a lot of y'all tell one-sided stories, so y'all gonna always gonna be in favor of you because you told a one-sided story. Duh. Y'all tell parts of stories and leave big chunks out. But again, I don't suggest that. It actually makes stuff worse, believe it or not. And again, I know from experience, it makes stuff worse because then you go down a spiral, then you go down a rabbit hole of asking the chat millions of one questions about what should I do, and this, and third. Now, business wise, a little different, but personal and relationally, I don't. It's not good. It's not healthy. Because even if it is right, you're gonna replace the voice of God with that. There we go. It jumped out. You're gonna replace the voice of God with ChatGPT because you went down a spiral. You went down a rabbit hole, and then it gets to the point where you're gonna say, instead of going to pray, you're gonna say, "Let me get on Ask ChatGPT." According to Health Life for GR, breaking the stigma around men's mental health, nearly 79% of suicides are male. The article ties that untreated mental illness, social expectations of men to man up in emotional suppression. Particularly relevant, men often don't reach out until crisis. And we've seen the situation with Kevin Hines. And then it says, according to Global Wellness Institute, men's wellness initiative trends for 2025, 1 in 10 men suffer from anxiety or depression, but about only half of them seek treatment. The report emphasizes that not acknowledging or unaliving pain, ignoring internal stressors, worsens both mental and physical health. And this comes from the Global Wellness Institute.org. So again, a lot of times you might drink it away, you might sex it away. I seen a post, man, we got all the gems this episode. I seen a post and it talked about being hypersexual, and it says that your hypersexuality is because you're probably depressed. And then I seen somebody say, well, if you don't get none, just say that. And I just think that is so ignorant, because a lot of times that hypersexuality, a lot of times something happened to you early on and you're trying to sex it away, or you just keep going. A lot of times you are depressed, and that's not always, but it's something there that you haven't dealt with for sure. And we've normalized hypersexuality, and that's why everybody just freaked out. And when I use the phrase freaked out, the easily offended get offended by that phrase because they're like, oh, you're just a prude. No, that's not what it is. It's just that you are freaked out, and ain't nothing wrong with, I guess, being freaky, which in the bed, I guess. But why does everybody need to know that you're a freak? And why do you don't try everything? Look, we're gonna go down a rabbit hole. I ain't trying to do that today. All right, y'all. So look, this is about suicide. So let's go into the final segment for today, which is the weekly sabbatical. And in this segment, we just kind of reminisce on some things real quick. All right. So this is the thing. We're talking about life. Who gave you life? What it's for? Some people might be shallow and say, well, my mama gave me life. She didn't do it by herself. So my parents gave me life. But who ultimately gave you life? God. What does it mean when you choose to end the gift that God gave you? Now, that's not to say how you feel does not matter. Again, I'll reiterate again, I've been there, so I understand. But I heard a pastor say one time that suicide was a form of pride. And when we think about pride, I want to unpack this because most times suicide is driven by unbearable pain. You know, there's no way out. You can't see a way out, which I believe you're demonically blinded. Trauma, and you know, you're afraid of judgment. Now, biblically, the definition of pride is a heart posture of self-exaltation, trusting in one's own strength, plans, or judgment over God's. It's the inward attitude that says, I know best, or I can do life my way. So I went and found some verses about God's knowledge and the purpose for life, right? So the first one is Jeremiah 1:5. It says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. One of the first verses I remember when I was in middle school, my mama wrote down and gave to me, and I remember it word for word. Jeremiah 20:11 says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. And then Psalm 139:13-16, it says, David on God knitting us together, God's days being written before one of them existed. And that's just kind of a summary that I had. But the point that I'm making is that God has told us so many times in the Bible. Like I said, I ain't no biblical scholar yet. I will be one day. But you know, there are several verses that talk about he knew us before we were in the womb even. So there was a purpose for our life. And so it might be hard to hear right now if you in that zone, but you know, the thing I want people to understand is you have a purpose. And one thing about me, and I've had a conversation with somebody, and I feel like even no matter what type of relationship I ever had with anybody, I always, especially at this age, I try to help them find their purpose, because everybody's called to do something. And you, even if you don't feel like it, and anytime when you ask somebody what they want to do in life and they say they don't know, that means to me, I believe when you was a child, you said what you wanted to do and somebody kind of shut it down. And also, and I'm gonna go back to the 50-50 thing. If anybody on this earth says that they were made or created to just be taken care of and they don't want to do nothing, you probably got some parental issues, some issues with your parents. You probably was fighting for your life financially or something, and now you want somebody to take care of you because you turned on. You got a freak fetish with somebody being turned by somebody that pays for stuff financially because your parents didn't do it. Something ain't right there. That's not right. If you just want to be taken care of, like, come on now, and you let that come out your mouth. There's many people that think like that. That's ridiculous. Your purpose is to do something. Even if he paid the bills, you still don't have the life saying, I'm just here to be taken care of. No. And there's men that think like that too. Topic for another day. So this is why some people might call the pastor's point about suicide pride. And now chat did break this down. See, you can use it for the right stuff. So it says the argument, because God has a plan and sovereign knowledge of our days, and this one's life may be seen as overriding God's timeline, an ultimate act of self-determination. I will decide when my life ends. In that posture, the critic sees a final refusal to submit to God's sovereignty, which biblically has been called pride. Now, this is where it gets complicated. More facts. Mental illness, unbearable pain, trauma, and chemical imbalances frequently remove rational choice. So keep that in mind. It says many theologians and pastors caution against labeling every suicide as pride, because they shouldn't. It says that risk blame, which push people further into silence. So we cannot fully read a person's heart or the weight that they bore. Scripture calls us to mercy, compassion, and to comfort those in suffering, not to cast stones from safety. So it does seem that way. If it's like, I'm gonna just decide, I'm gonna just do this, it's over, which in that case it is pride, because you're saying I choose to end my life. But in the same breath, so in the stance that by definition that is prideful. It is a prideful act. But does it mean your suicidal act was in pride? When you know what I'm saying? Because no, like I said earlier, a lot of times you think that I'm the problem or there's no other solution, so let me find a solution. And sometimes, and a lot of times with suicide, again from experience, you think that you're helping. In a weird way, you think that you're helping. You think you're a bird and you think, yeah, I'm the problem. It's time to go. So here's some questions I have for the people this week. I'm gonna ask it in first person, but I want you to think about it. Do I believe God has purpose for my days? If so, why am I tempted to cut mine short? So I'm not tempted to come mine short anymore. But if I think from past tense, it was more. So I felt like a burden. Like I believe God had a purpose, but I just felt like, why I feel this way? Why is this happening to me? You know, and then there's some people like me, you know, God has a purpose for you, but then it's like, well, why do I feel this way? Why did this happen to me? Why this? Why that? You know, and something Cindy Trim always says that I love when she would say, I don't say why me, I say try me. Yeah, I expect that to hit a little better, but it didn't. I don't think. It says, where am I trying to control outcomes because I can't tolerate waiting or pain? One thing about me is I like to know things. And sometimes, as somebody who struggles with overthinking, sometimes I believe that my mind can get to create scenarios. We always know create scenarios that never happen. But in unique ways, God has kind of calmed me down, especially in one situation that just happened where I realized, like, it can look one way to the naked eye, but if I just reveal to you this and that, just to hold on to this, whenever you start to overthink, hold on to this because I revealed this to you for a reason. So remember what I showed you. So don't let your emotions and your mind get the best of you. Keep that in mind. This is obviously for anybody who is, you know, if you are someone listening is in immediate danger thinking about suicide, please reach out now. In the U.S., call or text 988 for the suicide and crisis lifeline. If you're outside of the U.S., contact your local emergency services or local suicide prevention resources. You don't have to carry this alone. So keep that in mind. And honestly, you know, this is something else we got to go over. The two angles before we leave. The pride interpretation. Scriptural examples show people asserting their will against God has consequences. From the angle, some teachers interpret intentional self-ending as final self-sovereignty. But the compassionate counterpoint says that Christians and many pastors emphasize complexity. The pain, the illness, and distorted thinking remove full culpability, and the church's posture should be mercy and not rush to judgment. Now, when this pastor said it was a pastor, he wasn't coming from a place of judgment at all. Trust me. It could have came that way, but he wasn't at all, especially if you heard the whole message. But it's just something that he said that stuck out to me as somebody who battled with that at a point in time. The main thing is balancing truth with compassion. Two things can be true at the same time. You could stink, and you could have a bad smell, and it could have just been because you just got done working out. You know what I'm saying? So those things are true. Whereas somebody like, oh, that person stink. But then they left out where they just worked out. But so you see what I'm saying? Two things can be true at the same time, and it justifies why they stink versus they just musty. Because if you word it or frame it a certain way, it could be like, oh, you're trying to imply that person is musty. You get what I'm saying? I hope that makes sense. I hope that landed like I think it did. Question or challenge for a week. Ask yourself, who around me needs check-ins and not judgment? I want you to do that. I want you to see or think about anybody that may come to mind, or anybody, and pray. Ask God to put anybody in your mind that you might need to pray for, or call, or reach out to. Think about that. All right, y'all. A little harder one today. Still a few jokes in there that I like, just natural ones. But that's all I got. Thank y'all for tuning in. Tune in next week. We got another fire guest. PSA signing out. Always remember, keep your head up like your neck hurt. Remember who you are. Make your mind up. Don't let it make you. And always remember, I love us for real.